When writing faith-based sword and sorcery, body horror romance, illustrating your own books, running a massive conference and convention for authors, and dealing with chronic illnesses all really work into the same life? Can you actually do all of these things while having to cope with some difficulties? You can if you are the amazing guest in this interview, Becky Minor. I am so excited to share all of her insight and thoughts as she has created the Realm Makers organization, written a number of books, done illustrations, worked with children's books, and managed all of this while being a wife, a mom, and dealing with various chronic conditions and mental health conditions. She's super inspiring. I loved getting to talk to her about this, and you will not want to miss this interview. And real quick, if you hear the word author elevate bandied about, that was my previous name. Of course, now I use Janeen Ippolito or author culture, but that was the previous name of this podcast. And so if you're a little bit confused, that's what that's about. But it's a great interview, and I am super excited for you to listen to it. Friends, welcome to the interview here with the amazing Rebecca P. Minor, also known as Becky.
Absolutely.
It's also, whenever I see them, who's Rebecca P. Minor? Oh, it's Becky. Because
yes,
I just think of you as Becky, and then it's oh, who is this this long name and everything? It sounds very official.
It looks very official on a book cover.
It looks very impressive on a book cover, and that matters.
It does. Becky Minor, you expect something different.
I'm not sure what, but sure,
I'm not sure either, but it's something different. There's always something different.
Well, thank you for making time for being on my YouTube channel. And actually, this is also going to be one of those rare things that is cross-posted to the podcast. So for my listeners who are still we are sticking it out for podcast, welcome. You get to listen to this one too. But also, if you want to see the rest of the stuff, please do hop over to my YouTube channel, because that is where the majority of the content is. And yeah, so I am super excited to introduce Becky to you here with her official bio. Rebecca P. Minor is the author of 2 sword and sorcery fantasy series, The Windrider Saga and The Risen Age Archive. She joined the ranks of fantasy writers when stories that had been brewing in her head since the mid-1990s insisted on incarnation, which, I mean, this is the story of so many authors, right? This is what happens. Her training as an animator gives her a penchant or penchant. Oh my goodness. Now
I think it's penchant.
I think it's penchant.
It's one of those words you're I've always read it. I don't know how it's said.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the way it looks. But anyway, gives her a penchant for spirited adventures that sometimes betray her irrepressible snarkiness. When she's not writing, she and her husband, Scott, concoct all things related to the Realm Makers brand, whether that means events, book selling, or nerd herding online. Because she can't own dragons, she's constantly talking herself down from getting more cats. Okay, everyone wants to know, how many cats do you have right now?
It's only 2, and that's kind of not enough, I think. But, my husband keeps saying, if we're going to be mobile in the future, if we're going to be nomads and adventurers, how can we have a ton of cats? That's just not going to work. So,
I mean, they kind of can take care of themselves after all, right? You kind of just have a pack of cats. You elect one leader.
Exactly. Or they do, I think, is how it ends up going.
They know what they're doing. They're going to do
this. Yes. Just cats in cycle, I suppose. We get a good, 15, 20 years out of a few, and then somewhere in there, get them some younger companions to keep the loop going.
That makes sense. And Becky lives with Scott and their 3 boys about an hour outside of Philadelphia, but pines to live at least part-time in Hawaii. Don't we all?
Yes. And unfortunately, the riches have not rained from the sky to make that not the case.
I mean, I love seeing your pictures whenever you go to Hawaii, and I'm like, oh, look. They're in Hawaii again. It's like a magical place. Right there.
It is. It definitely has a whole nother world of magic. I just met a guy actually who does a podcast about basically X-Files in Hawaii. And I'm I have got to go find this podcast because that sounds amazing.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. That needed to happen. Now, we're going to jump right into all the fun questions because you have a lot to share, because you do a ton of things, and you have done a lot of things, and that's just really, really cool. So I'm excited to share about this.
Go ADHD.
Yes. Hey, you make it work for you. Okay. You just got to do that.
Absolutely.
But first of all, because I know a lot of times people hear about all of that Realm Makers businessy stuff, we're actually going to talk about your author side more, because you write books too.
Imagine that. That's how I got into
Imagine
this mess.
that. So, how long have you been writing in terms of when did you start like doing your drafting or your imagining? And then when did it get to like, oh, I actually have published books now?
In terms of novel format, I started writing in about 2008. So once my youngest kiddo started sleeping a decent amount and was no longer a baby that needed to be, in arms 24/7, that was kind of when my stories started hitting the keyboard. Before that, I had been an animator and screenwriter, and so that kind of stuff doesn't work that well when you're alone home, as a stay-at-home mom, which was very important to me. So once I got to that point with the third kiddo, um, manageable, that was when I started drafting novels. And honestly, it really took me until then to convince myself I was actually a writer, not just someone who would make adaptations. As a screenwriter, I was adapting the works of Lloyd Alexander and epic poems and all kinds of different um, inspiration like that. But that definitely helped me, I think, learn the structure of story. I call it the Ben Franklin method, where you just look at the greats and then you mimic them until you can get the innate sense of how that's constructed.
Oh yeah, and that, I mean, you're bringing up my teacher nerd side where like modeling is such a thing that you do in the classroom with students all the time, especially for any of you who know about classical education, which I taught for 3 years at a classical school. But yeah, that modeling, I find that can be so underrated sometimes. Like people don't think that you actually, you try to be original from the get-go and then you realize I have original ideas, but I really actually need to figure out what makes other stories work
Yeah,
before, taking that step with my own stuff.
there's a whole psychology, obviously,
Oh
to
yeah.
what makes stories work. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really just a matter of repackaging those, depends on who you talk to, the 7, 9, or 12 stories that exist in
Oh my
humanity.
goodness. Yeah. Yeah, they
And
have a lot of people really get into that kind of research and such with literature, and especially across different cultures too.
yeah. And I guess the second half of the question was how long did it take before things really became books?
Yeah.
My first book was published as serial fiction, actually, in starting in 2011. So the Windrider Saga started its life as Digital Dragons
Mm-hmm.
ongoing serial feature. And then I pulled that back and expanded and made it into what works better as a novel format, almost at the same time that I was in a contract for the beginning of the Prison Age Archive as well. So it was kind of like everything I wrote got published between about 2011 and 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And then then Realm-Makers happened at the same time. So it was kind of like, oh my gosh, what is happening? My life is sort of in an explosion.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness. It is crazy how like feels like nothing is happening and everything is happening at once. And sometimes it's trying to figure out first of all how to wait through all that time of work with not really seeing many results, but then also how to survive when everything is happening at
Yes.
once.
Yes. And not get burnt out.
Oh yeah. Because then everything happens at once, but you can't sustain it beyond that. And sustaining
Right.
it is how you keep doing fun things versus burning
Exactly.
out and saying, I'm gonna crawl in a hole now and forget I ever did this. Which
Right. Please don't call.
it can be a mood. It can be a mood.
Yes.
All right. So what kinds of books or stories do you write?
Typically, it's a sword and sorcery kind of fantasy where some people are like, what does that actually mean? How's that different from high fantasy or whatever? Um, when you think of sword and sorcery, you think about the 80s and D&D and those capers where people are going after the MacGuffin. There's the artifact that needs to get gotten before the bad guy uses it to end the world or whatever. More lighthearted, not taking itself too seriously. The world building is there and underlying, but it's not necessarily that milieu story that you're going to see like in your
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien, and it's not going to be your newer fantasies that are really politically intertwined and
Mm-hmm.
it's expansive. It's not going to cover like generations of activity. It's a little bit more of an encapsulated story. My stories also tend to be somewhat character focused in terms of you've definitely got a tight ensemble where you're looking at the journey of one character with a couple of perhaps um, secondary and tertiary characters who develop as well alongside them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the way you frame that out too, because that actually, when you were thinking about, when you were explaining the whole concept of sword and sorcery, and I was thinking, well, that actually also applies to a lot of adventure stories. Like I immediately went to sort of Indiana Jones
Yeah.
Because I recently watched another YouTube analysis of Indiana Jones, so that's where my brain came. But that whole concept of, having the MacGuffin, having the dangerous object of doom or not doom or something, and you have to try to find it or rescue it, and keep following that kind of adventure and that journey versus this giant, expansive, I'm going to make up a word here, Sandersonian or Jordanian, except Jordanian also refers to people from Jordan, not just Robert Jordan, but that's where I was going with
it's a little bit like it's that other kind of Jordanian.
Dune-tastic? I'm not sure. Like that kind of huge scope where the characters can get lost in the journey, and honestly they're not always the most important part of the journey, and you don't always get attached to them, which is good, because when you have this giant epic storytelling and it's over the course of many books, sometimes a character you liked in book one, oh, you do not like them later on that story. No, you do not.
Right. No. Like, things have happened and I don't like him anymore.
They make unwise choices. And because it's so epic, you can still read the story and enjoy the epic scope, even while you're like, wow, yeah, I'm not team you anymore. Nope. That
you switched teams on me and I don't appreciate it.
And also that one over there, I hated you, but now you're okay. We can be friends.
There you go. Shifting loyalties is okay in some formats.
Yes. And definitely in some of those things where it's more about telling these bigger, high concept worlds, your characters can be a little more archetypal versus your books that I found your characters a lot more nuanced and fleshed out. They have these journeys that you want the readers to really care about them, and also occasionally sometimes strangle them, but we're just talking about them now.
Well, I remember getting into a discussion with someone at one of my early writers conferences about archetypal characters and how this person was dead set that nobody should ever have an archetype in their writing. And I'm like, not everybody can be this, the characters serve purposes too.
Yeah.
Because I consider my character of Presidio in the Risen Age archive.
Yeah.
He's very much an archetype. He is the mentor in the hero's journey. And I was like, he doesn't really need to be more than that. And for me to decide to make him more than that would just be shoehorning content, in my opinion. So we agreed to disagree about archetypes, but that was that.
Yep. And there is room for both of those angles in it. Now, we did actually have a question show up from the Author Elevate social media. And so for those of you who are watching or listening, before we do these interviews, I am going to be posting up opportunities for you to actually ask questions that can be asked in the interview itself, so that you get to have your questions answered. And this one came from Tad Atchley, who wants to hear a little bit about how Becky came up with a magic system in her Risen Age archive series. Magic can be a contentious subject in faith-based communities. I'm going to do an aside. This is so true. Like every time it shows up in Realmakers Consortium, I go, oh,
it's time for that discussion again. The next one will roll on is profanity, but anyway.
Oh, yes. And then we're going to go right into content ratings for heat levels.
Woohoo, right? Just because we might as well do all the fighting at once.
We might as well just go there. Yes, because people have very different perspectives on things, and these are not salvation issues, so you can have your perspectives.
Exactly.
But in this case, he was saying Minor's system is both creative and faith-affirming. And I noticed also when I read your books with Risen Age that you really put a lot of thought into this system and how it was going to be portrayed. And so, yeah, share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. For me, as a Christian writer, I want to be able to speak to God's character without necessarily mirroring the Bible one for one. And that's part of why I write in Second World Fantasy, where it's not connected to Earth at all. It's an entirely different universe. And therefore, I feel like the rules can be different. I mean, there have been times that people ask me, are your characters even Christians? And I'm like, well that question doesn't, I was like, that doesn't quite work. It's like, there is a creator God, and essentially my magic system flows out of a divine source in terms of there is a creator God who is the God of that universe, the one and only creator of things. There are other supernatural entities in the world, the darkness being sort of the not somewhat Satan figure, but in opposition to the creator, an opposing force that wishes to undo or to sully what the creator does in daily life. So those divine sources are where people can call out to for magic. So if you're a follower of the creator and willingly being a servant of the creator, Creo, then if you have that innate talent, it's also a talent. Not everybody can just do this. It's something that's inborn. If you have that talent and you choose to serve the creator with that talent, then you are granted power according to your capacity and to your wisdom and knowledge and growth in your area of service. Some people are more innately powerful than others. Say you compare my two protagonists, Vignonel and Danae. Vignonel is innately just going to be more powerful than she is just because of who he is and what he's destined for.
Yes, he is all the awesome. And he knows it.
But you also hate him, which is another discussion.
Usually because he's all the awesome and he knows it, yeah.
And you're just like, dude, and that you still made that choice. Anyway.
Yeah.
So this divine miracle type power comes through Creo for his purposes. If you call upon that power for reasons that are not so noble, he may decide that nothing's going to happen. It's ultimately up to the creator whether or not something happens. Sometimes you may call on something for the wrong reasons and he may let it happen and then you suffer the consequences, which is kind of in some ways allegorical to sin. You choose to use your abilities for the wrong reasons. It's really all tied into that divine tapestry. Those who don't know the creator or choose to reject him but still have that magical ability inborn into them may choose to corrupt that and draw on power from darkness. And darkness is, again, a supernatural entity that is capable of working through mortals. And again, those people are usually looking to subvert what the creator and his followers are trying to accomplish. Usually they're pretty much free reign to do whatever they ask to do, because there's basically like a tax. If you're not following the creator, you're following darkness. Darkness says, I tally this against you. You owe me things in order to make this happen. You owe me your servitude in terms of pain and suffering inflicted upon others. And specifically, there's a cult that basically the demigod of that cult keeps the demigod eternally functioning by sacrifice to him. And so there's always this situation where your debts are counted against you, and chances are you're going to use more power than you actually pay for. So you're just going to be in this loop of indebtedness and actually not freedom in the end.
Yeah, see, I love how well thought out that is and everything too, and the freedom that you do have to do that you have with that in a secondary world. And I've seen that kind of construct done where it's kind of like you can make, this team or this team, and there are two teams. That's pretty much it. And it is a great way to bring in that kind of worldview and that Christian worldview to the story, while still, some people say, well, does it have a Christ figure? Does it have this and does it have that? And I'm like, it's a different world. It's a different planet. And
Yes.
and it can have things happen differently, but you can still have stuff that reflects the truth that Christians believe. And that can be really powerful in that way. And then also can actually bring in people who may not be of Christian faith, who just like the story.
I like to think of it as a covenantal type of world.
Yeah.
Where it really has to do with the relationship and the deal you strike, essentially, not so much in wheeling and dealing on the creator side, but just that your commitment to using your abilities well.
Yeah, and I like the way that you're doing that, where you're pulling out like sort of one section. I think one way that people of faith can get really a little bit off track when they're trying to put that into their story is they're trying to take everything and shove it in there all at once.
Right.
And if you're looking at the Bible, that's 66 books.
And thousands of years.
And different genres in each one.
Yes.
So this might not be the best idea to feel obligated to put all of that in there. But what you can take out is you can take out chunks here or chunks there that reflect that. And that can maybe invite questions and things. And that can make it a little easier on you instead of trying to figure out how to cram everything all at once into a story world, because it just won't support it after a while. And then it does become a bit preachy. If you spend 20 pages describing the theology of your magic system, which Becky does not do this, by the way, not remotely, but if you do this, that might be a sign that your book is just a little bit preachy, and even the choir will start to tune you out. And
yes, this is true. And it feels to me more organic if it trickles.
Yeah.
My philosophy in magic systems and world building is the reader only needs to know what touches the characters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if they're interacting with it, then it'll start to make sense to the reader as it's making sense to the characters.
Yeah.
And I feel like that has worked well for me in terms of avoiding those dumps of information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. Now, we are going to jump genres here quite a bit and talk about what you are currently working on, or I believe
Cool.
just finished, actually.
Yes. The giant draft has just I'm letting it cool is where
Mm-hmm.
it is now, and I'm going to be printing it out this week and taking it off to the retreat with me to probably just take some of it. I'm not going to bring all 193,000 words of it to the retreat. I feel like this is too heavy to even carry in my bag. But anyway, so the book I'm working on right now, which may end up 2 books or may end up 1 book, I'm still the jury's out on that,
Mm-hmm.
um, is still fantasy. It's still set in my story world. So there's, for readers I have already, that's going to be familiar in terms of how things work and what races and characters are around. It's set in a time period early on in the Risen Age War. That is where Danae's story takes place.
Okay.
Um, but it focuses on by elves that are on the eastern side of the continent, and some other races as well. But this is fantasy, but it's dark fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
It might also fit into body horror a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It and essentially the
So, wait,
premise,
let's unpack the word body horror for anyone who might be unfamiliar with that term.
body horror, like we like to think of, like the first thing I think of honestly is Franz Kafka's the Metamorphosis,
There we
where
go.
you're just like, okay, I was once something and now I am something else, and it's
Mm-hmm.
horrifying.
Yep.
It might not be quite that extreme. This is not that quite that extreme, or just times where the things that are horrifying about the story have to do with one's own person, something that is
Mm-hmm.
changing or going wrong, or now discovered as awful about oneself physically. It's not necessarily like a spiritual conundrum so much as it is a horrifying physical conundrum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's really where it sits in terms of
Mm-hmm.
body horror for this story.
Okay.
Um, the premise I keep giving people is Handmaid's Tale meets Alien, which tends to get a little bit of a reaction typically, um, in a fantasy genre with a portal and all kinds of good stuff. I can't seem to stay away from portals. They keep just popping up in my worlds.
I mean,
But
portals do this sometimes, it just happens.
right, they're established, they exist. So, but so it's a portal fantasy with body horror elements, dark fantasy, and basically asks the question, what happens when a woman is pregnant via a violent act and also a prisoner for that exact purpose, and you know that this baby's coming is going to result in her death. So,
Wow.
just hit all the triggering
So
questions.
just light, easy, fluffy things,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
casual stuff there.
And human trafficking. I forgot about that one.
Actually, I almost like figured that was maybe part of it because that's one
Yeah.
of the situations where those kind of things often do happen.
Yeah.
So of course I have to follow this up with why this story? What inspired you to go in this direction after having all of your more sword and sorcery style things?
This story has been nagging at me for several years, I would say, in terms of a story I just feel like deserves to be told. It's obviously, yes, very different than the light-hearted sort of jaunting that I have been doing with my characters, but it's very central, honestly, to the conflict in my world. People who are familiar with the conflicts that have been in the past involve my dragon kin, who are a cursed race of male lizard men
Mm-hmm.
that came about in ancient history because of another story that I'm going to be giving away. Um, but I'm brushing that one up for a giveaway. Um, but because of the fact that this race of people is so central to a lot of what's going wrong in terms of the warfare in my world, um, I felt like we it just needed to be explored as to what other deeper effects are they having other than marching in armies,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a more cancerous societal thing that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and how is it happening without being
Mm-hmm.
stopped?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so asking a lot of big, high concept questions. They're really powerful ones that are really, really relatable to the human experience of why are these bad things happening? What's the origin of all of this? Where is this coming from? How do we cope with these kind of horrific situations? And navigate all of that. So going in this, really potent direction, um, I'm just curious, where's the romance fitting in?
Oh yeah, I forgot about there is romance in there as well. The initial setup for the story is there is a young couple, Vestra and Asterion, who are elves from the eastern side of Argent. They're known as the Kelevanese,
Mm-hmm.
and they're engaged to be married. And unfortunately, Vestra is a commoner. She's a cartographer assistant. Really, she's learning. She's in that like journeywoman phase, and she's been assigned to map out Asterion's barony. He is on the cusp of coming into his own and taking on lands. And via that relationship professionally, she and he connect and decide they're the ones for each other, which is not great in Kelvedis society. You usually stay in your circle, as they put it. It's a very caste driven society, okay. Very traditional that way. But so it's a little bit of that star-crossed lovers, a little bit in terms of them not really being societally meant for one another, but exercising their desire to be together anyway. Mm-hmm. So that romance is the setup for the situation where they are scouting out his land, and that's where she and he get separated as she gets captured by the dragonkin.
And all the terrible things happen from then on.
From there, yes.
So in the way, the romance actually works to make the horror more horrific and painful.
Exactly,
because she's losing even more here. Yes.
Yes, Vestra has a picture of her future, and the beginning of the story essentially says, Vestra had a future living in a castle. She knew that was coming, but she didn't expect it to be the one she's in, because it opens with her in this prison castle instead of where she and Asterion were planning to be in their near future.
Mm-hmm. So what are your hopes for this story?
I think conversation, honestly. I think that a lot of times as readers of faith, it's easy for us to just say, oh, some things are so terrible, I would never consider them. And when you really are at that point of desperation, you're isolated, and everything that you thought was going to be true about your life has changed, and you're counting the days until your demise. What are you willing to do to stop that? Where does that perpetuation of existence, where is the line on that? Where do you accept your fate, and where do you fight against it, and how far do you go?
I love that. I am really excited about this. I'm glad you did this. I know it's one of those things some people are going to go, wow, she went there. Where is this
exactly.
going to go? Who's going to read this? But sometimes there are stories that I believe just need to exist just because they need to exist. And is everyone going to appreciate them and enjoy them? Well, no, but the right people will.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, and no book is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing about that, and yeah, keep working on, of course, all those amazing edits now that you get to do on it.
Being like, okay, is everything doom every moment? Do we have any levity? We do have a little bit of levity.
Little beats here and there.
There's a giant rat who is
I
one of those.
I was just thinking if there was a rat.
There is a rat. There's a giant rat who is one of those like the hero rats who goes and finds landmines. He's like that size.
Wow.
And sorry, she is. Her name is Andime, and she is.
Is this inspired by your rats?
Of course, the rats that we loved for several years. Rats are very maligned in circles of people who don't know them. So I was like, I'm going to create this adorable rat character just to, give a little nod to the fact that rats are very intelligent and can just, give some people some joy. So
yeah,
Asterion's best friend, who is from another continent, has brought this rat with him as his companion, and she's a tracker. So she actually plays a part in the story as well. She has a role to play.
Oh, good. I love that. That's honestly sometimes the way to make these stories a little more palatable or a little more okay, we can get through this is by a cute animal. I am such a
pet the rat.
Yes. Just focus on the rat for a second before you go back to the horrible doom.
Exactly.
All right, now hopping over again, you were also a trained artist and illustrator. Again, you're doing all the things here. We talked about, you shared about how you started off doing illustrative work and adaptative work. So, how do you find that's influenced your creativity?
I think that it just helps me now to visualize how I want things to sound and look.
Hmm.
When I can picture it in my mind, then it's easier to describe.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's easier for me to go overboard a little bit. Like in one
Hmm.
of my stories, somebody had said in a read of it, they said, "I can tell that you are a visual artist by reading this paragraph." And I was like, and they meant it as a compliment. So that was nice. But it just in terms of when something needs to be very lush and I want my readers to experience that, the visual arts help me just in
Hmm.
terms of giving that kind of sensory description for it.
Hmm.
I like to draw characters. That's my primary area of training is character animation from
Hmm.
way back in the 90s when it was all on paper.
Hmm.
So I feel like having that sense of what the characters' nuances are in terms of their personality, sometimes just a little sketch will help
Hmm.
me solidify that. Sometimes like the one character I have never been able to capture is Calduin from the Risen Age
I
archive.
was actually just going to ask because he doesn't have any art, and like he's
Oh my gosh, he has
adorable.
so much art that is unfinished in my sketchbooks because I'm like, that's not him either. So Calduin's been a trick. But Vigneron definitely
Oh
I found his look
gosh.
early. Danae's look I found early.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm working on some work of definitely my new characters in the body
Hmm.
horror fantasy.
Oh,
And
nice.
changing them up because the culture I'm working in is
Mhm.
more a little bit more Renaissance, late Renaissance in terms of its look. And so hairstyles and clothing are going to be more ornate and that sort of thing. So I'm
Mhm.
really pulling a lot from history, trying to find the right look for those
Mhm.
characters.
That is fantastic. And yeah, I think he'll do, maybe he's just a floof. Maybe we're just going to blame that. You know, he's a floof who's also like really intelligent and can do things. And sometimes it's hard to capture, I think.
It's hard to get all of his different and his brother envy and his darker side that comes up in that series. So he has a lot
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on.
Then the bits of humor and that kind of stuff and the flirtations is all in the same face. And you're like, wow,
Yeah, you're like, how do
that's
you get the murderous rage and brought up by the sword and also the marshmallow healer
yes.
surgeon?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's not like you're capturing like sort of one perspective in a drawing where sort of, and you know, it's like arrogance. Sorry, Vinny.
Yeah, exactly. Totally full of himself and rarely loses unless he's being crushed to death by dark magic.
Yeah, yeah, it's the kind that you just got to keep heaping trouble on them because they keep sort of asking for it. Like, oh, I can do it. Oh, you think you can do it? Okay, we're gonna make this like 50 times worse than sorry, you other people in the book.
Yeah,
Vinny
right.
said he can do it, so we gotta make it worse.
It's one of those fool around and find out kind of moments.
Hmm. And for all of you viewers out there, and for anyone who is listening who wants to hop over to YouTube, we will have a link in the YouTube description where you can check out Becky's portfolio on her website and see all of her cool art. And
Which also has a bunch of children's art in there because that's
yes.
actually where the money comes from if I do art. Children's book illustration and that sort of thing. I
Hmm.
was heavily doing graphic novel and chapter book illustration from about
Hmm.
2015 to 2018. Um, that was part of why I wasn't writing as much during that
Mm.
period because I was freelancing as an artist. Um, but sometimes chronic illness and production schedules say we're not going to be able to do all of this, so you got to pick and choose.
Oh, that is 100% true. And I mean, of course, during the whole time, you're doing this little tiny side hustle called Realm Makers.
Right?
You know,
Just
just a little thing that just keeps growing and growing and growing. You know, thanks to you and of course, Scott trying to tell the whole world about it. Um,
doing our best.
so share with our viewers and listeners what this is in your own words, because even if they're familiar with it, it's always good, I think, to hear about this stuff from the founder of it.
Right.
What's their vision for this?
So Realm Makers was the project that God dropped in my lap while I was answering phones at a sheet music company as my day hustle. It's my day job. Really, it was the outgrowth of the fact that speculative fiction authors who also are faith honoring people had no home. It was a matter of looking around at what existed in the marketplace, whether it was Comic-Con or whether it was a large Christian writers conference, both which are wonderful what they do, but are not 100% for the people like me or the people like Janeen, who write speculative fiction, who want to honor God, who don't want to be mocked in the places where they're going to learn, and who don't want to be misunderstood or even almost feared, depending on where they go. So home, it's really just, I wanted to create a sense of home for the people who are like us.
And what I love about that you and Scott really stalwartly try to do with your overall team, is that you work really hard to make it a place for Christian authors, not necessarily people who always write like very Christian-y fiction or writing for like the CBA market or stuff. But you try to make it a place for anyone who has that faith, who knows it's going to reflect in their books somehow, that they can all be welcome in the same place, which I know sometimes means as you grow, you have to like herd cats here and there
Right.
because
stop the cat fights. There is some of that.
because people are going to come in and some of them are going to be very convicted that they should like only write in this certain content category, and the people like, well, no, I definitely need to write in this category. From my angle, even though I will include different aspects of my worldview in my stories, I stalwartly keep focused on the general market. That's just where I go, and those things look different. And so what I love about Realm Makers is that you really are continuing to try to say, okay, no, we're all going to be under the same boat here. You have to learn to get along with people who are going to write books that you may never read, and that is okay.
Right.
And I really just love how you're continuing to do that, because it's so important, I think, for creatives to have that place of commonality, instead of, I think sometimes it's very easy to get into smaller cliques. Say,
Yes.
okay, well, we're the cool people over here, and they do that over there. And we're not really sure if they're Christian, but someone let them in, and it's like,
right.
no, everyone sort of behave here. It's okay.
Every now and then there's just, occasional reminders that go out as to, we are not going to be 100% agreed on every piece of doctrine that's out there. And that's okay, because that's why there are denominations of Christianity. And if you want everybody in this room to be just like you, this might not be the place for you.
Yes.
It's scary to say that sometimes, because, it was like, we don't want to lose people. There goes the cat. Sorry for the earthquake on my side.
That is totally okay.
Cat launch. Just sometimes you just have to say, if we're not serving you well, if you're not comfortable with the way we're doing things, I don't want you to feel like you have to change us or we have to do something differently. There are lots of places to hang out, and we want you. You're welcome. But if this isn't good for you, we accept that.
Yep. That's a very healthy place to come to, especially in this age of people not dealing with differences in healthy ways all the time.
Yeah.
Shockingly.
It's a very human way to be. Unfortunately, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
But
So,
we every now and then we put out the flames and we say, everybody, remember, this is a place where we respect one another, even if we disagree.
Absolutely. So doing all of that and having, the bookish bookstore, where it's kind of its own thing that's sort of under these umbrellas, but it's kind of its own thing. And then you go to all these conferences, and then you do the Realm Makers conference, and you do the retreat, and you have all these other plans in the future, and you have the Realm Sphere. What is it like balancing Realm Makers and having all that with your own creative pursuits?
It has been sort of a learning process of how to switch gears. I'm not great at switching gears. I like to block time and focus very intently on the thing that I'm doing. And so when somebody comes along with a private message and says, I need help with this argument that's happening, or do you know what the schedule for this thing is going to be 8 months from now? Or have you signed a contract for this? It's a challenge for me to say, okay, I'm going to put this other thing aside and I'm going to do the thing that's urgent. So it's been an exercise in setting some boundaries in terms of like, this is the time that I'm dealing with only this, unless something is on fire. And then if it's on fire, okay, I will step away. But if it's not on fire, it can wait until 4 o'clock when I stop doing this.
Yeah. And I think honestly, that's the truth of anyone out there who is, you're an author, but you have these bigger visions. You want to do more books. You want to like do offshoots of that or adjacent stuff for authors, or do author services or anything else. It becomes a push and pull between the creativity and all the other stuff. And even if you have more books out there, like I keep warning people, the more books you write, that's more things that you're going to feel like, oh, I should be promoting that. Oh, I haven't promoted that. Oh, I need to update that back matter. I haven't had like that email address in 2 years. Oh, wait a second. I said I would cross promote this. And then
someday we'll have people, right, to do those things. But
yeah,
right
but then when
now,
you have people, again, I ran a press for 7 years. When you have people, then you have to manage the people.
you have to tell the people
So,
the things need to be done. Yeah, exactly. And we're in that place now where we've expanded into a few contractors at Realm Makers that help us with the things that need doing. But it's a very rare person that you can pull into your circle that is very self-motivated and doesn't feel like they have to ask permission to have an idea, you know? And those people are super valuable. If you ever get them in your life, you need to treat them with utter respect and tender loving care so that they can keep doing what they do best. But just that finding exactly the people for the time that we need them to come in and say, what if we do it this way, and help us shake up the mold a little bit, let go of some things. I personally am probably very little happier to let go of administrative things than I should be. It's like, I do need to know what's going on with that. But it's definitely a challenge and a blessing to have people who are willing to like look at the vision and join into it, and then bring their perspective to making it better.
Yep. Yep. So important. Now, with all these things you're doing, you also do life with a number of chronic conditions, both physical, some dietary stuff, and then mental health stuff. What is it like having to balance all of that with all these other things you're doing? At Author Elevate, we absolutely do not shy away from how those things are part of life. You can do success with those things, but definitely alters how you do business, how you do creativity. So, what are some ways that you've learned to cope with the things that you deal with?
I would say probably in the past 5 years, my goal has been to make peace with who and what is going on in my physiology. Essentially, 80% of what's going on stems from the fact that my sixth chromosome is not right.
Oh, you have that.
I've
Was it
gotten
Merthyr? Merthyr
I've
gene
gotten down.
response?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
You know it. You know it.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that is kind of in that constellation of um, ulcerative colitis is my
Mm-hmm.
primary autoimmune condition,
Mm-hmm.
and then that, of course, brings with it um, nutrition issues and also fatigue. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, I have a fibromyalgia diagnosis, which I don't think is a junk diagnosis like some people do.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there is probably more to discover as science digs into all of this in the
Mm-hmm.
chromosomal and
Yeah.
gene expression, all of this. That
Mm-hmm.
I've got some days I wake up and I'm just like, oh, today's going to be a wrist day where my left wrist is just like, I'm hurt. And I'm like, no, you aren't. And it says, yes, I am. So my nervous system is doing that thing for whatever reason. So chronic inflammation is kind of the thing that I have to look at every day and go,
Mm-hmm.
how inflamed am I? How much am I
Yep.
going to be able to do because of that? What's on my list? And how does the hierarchy look?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
with my family, honestly, is still at a place where they are at first on the list.
Mm-hmm.
If there's food that needs to be made or stuff that needs to be taken care of with kids, my kids are 17 and up now, so they're getting to the point where they're not super needy, which is amazing. But a 17-year-old still has the coming home from school days where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I had a bad day, and we're going to work on that. We're going to sit with it, and we're going to talk. Um, and these things trickle down, So as we've discovered late in life, I'm a Gen Xer, so ADHD didn't exist as a real thing when I was growing up, and girls sure didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So although I have not had the full testing, I know that I am somewhere on the spectrum, and ADHD is definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that trickles into anxiety and depression.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to say it's like, oh, you have this and this and this and this, but it's
Yep.
more like there's just this big cloud of stuff that exists in your life. Some of it's physiological, some of it's, in a not being neurotypical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just have to go, what is my bandwidth today? I love the spoon theory
Yes, I
notion.
love the spoon theory.
And if people don't know what spoon theory is, it's just a matter of like everybody wakes up with a certain number of spoons each day and that represents how much energy you have to do the things. And for some people, taking a shower takes no spoons. But for me, some
I
days
can't
taking a
even imagine
shower
that. Yeah.
is like 3 spoons, and like I can't hold my arms up long enough to wash my hair. That's part of why I have short hair now, is because there would be days that I'm like, it's too much. I want clean hair, but I don't have the spoons to have long hair. So anyway, it's just one of these dances where you're like, what is important to me? What is true about who I am? And I can do some things each day to mitigate those things, but you can't do everything that's out there, and you will make
Yeah.
yourself crazy searching like what should I be doing? I could literally fill my entire day, all my waking hours with wellness activities because there's just that much that people will say you could do this, you could do that. So I'm like, well, today I'm going to do some meditating because I feel like I'm anxious. I'm going to get my meditation going, and it's not like a transcendental sort of new
Yeah.
age meditation. People get a little nervous about meditation in Christianity. It's a matter of breathing and holding your breath and breathing out and just taking the time to do those mindfulness things. um, I've learned recently that that is really necessary for me. If I don't do that, everything else starts to come apart at the seams. And I can incorporate my prayer life into that and my time in the Bible. Fortunately, that's all actually compatible and complementary, not necessarily exclusionary. And once I've managed my family and my own health, then I can pick the things that are meaningful and important for the day.
I love that. And I mean, the next question was actually going to be about how to balance creativity in multiple ways, but you've just given us a lot of really useful things there. Can totally relate to the spoon things, and you can do things some days that you can't do other days, which I'll tell people like, yeah, like, wow, you're being so productive today. I'm like, no, today is a good day. Today's a mostly good day. So I'm going to get as much as I can healthily get done today, because
Right.
not all days are like this day.
And I'm not going to overdo it today. I'm not going to be tempted to go, I'm going to go like crazy and then lose the next
Yeah,
3 days.
that's also the struggle too. It's like, balancing out too much, and like things where I do try to do some health and fitness stuff, and so I'm on a couple YouTube channels, people who have like immune issues, and they say, don't push yourself. When those people say, feel the burn and push yourself, don't do it, because then you won't be able to work out tomorrow, because your body's going to say, wait, what did we do? Why did we do this?
My
No.
favorite phrase, post exertional malaise.
Oh my goodness, yes, and then
You're
it can
like,
last
yes.
for days afterwards.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
like,
what
oh,
is
I
it?
went to Hershey Park yesterday, therefore I'm useless for 3 more days.
Yep. And with inflammation, like your body can't figure out, this is good muscle inflammation. This is called building muscle. And the body says, oh no, it's inflammation. That's bad. So
You're
now
like,
we need to
cytokine
make,
storm, boo!
yes, let's just like make everything inflamed.
And people are like, they're speaking another language. Yeah, there's a lot. And I have like a morbid fascination with medicine anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I was a better student, I was a more diligent student. I have the
Mm-hmm.
brains probably to be a doctor, but not the
Mm-hmm.
temperament to do the things that need to be done. But so physiology is very interesting to me, so at least I can do that studying. But it's really it really is an interesting puzzle. And then of
Mm-hmm.
course for mine I add on top of it, I have to watch every bite that goes into my mouth and what the
Oh
ingredients
my
are.
goodness, the food issues. Yeah.
So
Oh.
it's like, okay, I'm subscribed to this very tiny diet to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not exacerbating anything. And that
Mm-hmm.
just gets to be annoying. I'm not going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, let's go out to dinner. Oh, we can't go to this place, that place, or this place because I can't get
Mm-hmm.
anything gluten free. And there's going to be too much garlic at this place. And the onions are going to be everywhere in this
Yeah.
one. And if they don't have green onions, blah, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. But, you learn how to, again, pick and choose what's the most important
Mm-hmm.
and
And
then
I think,
fill in.
yeah, then fill in the different places you can. And I think that just let that be an encouragement to anyone who's watching or listening to this. You may not have the huge plethora of things that I have or Becky has here, where you have to keep track of 5 different areas, but everyone has stuff that means that you can't do everything you want to do. And you
Right.
shouldn't do everything that you want to do, because you can't do that and survive as a healthy human.
Right.
I think one thing about this whole like globalized internet age is that you feel like you should be doing so much more, because you can find YouTube videos on upgrading, or you can find this really easy, checklist or these things. But the thing is, even those easy checklists and tips and tricks, which I love, you can only do so many of those in a day. You just don't have the bandwidth. We weren't meant to have the bandwidth to like live this like sort of computerized, optimized life. We just can't. We weren't meant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to just step back and say, okay, I can only do this much, and just, as I say, put blinders on. This is where I'm at. I'm not going to look at that person over there who's doing something different.
Right.
This is my life. And going back to what you said about, learning a bit of acceptance with that, and not fatalism, but just, okay, this is where I am. I'm going to stop pretending like I don't have to deal with this.
Yeah. Acceptance isn't settling. And that's, I think we live, especially in the US, we get a lot of that, like, oh, you shouldn't settle for that. And when I was a stay-at-home mom, it's like, oh my goodness, why are you just settling for being home with your children? And I was like, this is a privilege to do that, and it's a privilege to be able to choose between the things that I can do. As much as there are sacrifices in my life, I'm living the dream when it comes down to it, in terms of doing something that's incredibly important to me full time. I mean, I don't know of another conference director who is doing that as their main job, And part of it is sacrifice. You go, what am I willing? How much prosperity am I willing to sacrifice? We're not taking vacations all the time, and we're not, we can make it look like we're having a grand old time, but it's very rare that we do extravagant things. And that's okay, because the things that I am doing are important things.
Yep. I mean, I hear you there. Again, people look at this and go, wow, you know things like, I'm married to a full-time missionary, right? Like, that. Like, I married a guy who told me on our like first or second date, I am called to full-time ministry. And I said, right, cardboard boxes, it is. So, right. and it's being okay with that. And it's saying, this is the life where I'm at, and I'm content with it. This is where God has me, and that's good.
And reality checks for myself. It's like, I really am attracted to the idea of being an off-grid, homesteader, but would I be able to do that and this? No. And I need to keep reminding myself that that's not going to be an and sort of thing. It'll be a different phase of life, if it is a thing ever.
Oh, and I love the idea of traveling the world. And then my husband reminds me, he's like, with all of your pills that you have to get through customs. I'm like, okay. And he's like, and the fact that we can't eat like gluten, dairy, and several other different things that we just can't eat. And also we take all these other supplements so that if we do eat something accidentally, we won't die for like 2 weeks afterwards. We can't take those with us. You're going to try to explain this to people in other languages. I'm like, you know what?
Just give me the rice.
Yes, I will just live on rice and salads and only certain things in the salads and olive oil. It will be okay.
And not even the salad, because the salad was grown in foreign water, and that might make you sick.
Oh man, it's just not even fair.
Yeah, the world traveling. Amazing, but also not that practical sometimes.
A lot more complicated when you're considering all the different chronic stuff and everything. And not even that, just I was trying to keep track of business things.
Yeah.
So time for the random question, which Becky did not get this one
in
advance. Okay. So in this one, I'm going to actually be a little bit more like, it's random, but it's also kind of personal. I can pick on this because Becky knows how I feel about Vinny. So Vinny, you get to have him in your life for a day. He just shows up and you're stuck with him for a day. What do you do?
Follow him around, probably.
Like it's in your house, in your life, and all of that. He looks exactly the way he does with weapons and everything.
And black armor, the whole bit. He'd be like, I'm sure he probably wouldn't fit through half the doorways, and it'd be a problem. But
no, he would blame the doorways, of course.
Yeah, of course. He'd be like, "Who built this place? This is a shame." That would be. I every now and then, I think every author has that moment of like, what happens if my character gets into life? I think it'll just be a matter of really just enjoying his fascination with how strange our world is, in terms of like, what is this construct on the hard ground outside, because cars, just all of the technology that we have. I think it would be interesting just getting his take on that, and just getting a good laugh out of his consternation at all of it. Like, what is the point of this? Like, why are you looking at cats that are not even cats? They're just flat on a shiny panel. Yeah. Be like, Why would you not want to watch cats? If you brought Majestrum with him, I think that
Yes.
would make everything way better. We would just go fly. I'd be like, you're taking me flying, and that's all we're going to do. And we're going to, I don't know, go to Hawaii because we can get there pretty quickly
Yeah.
next couple of days. Um, but without the dragon, I think it would be just a matter of exploring, to just let's get out and see what, how this world has changed and how it's not not better. It's just
Yeah.
different,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think probably apologizing a lot also.
Oh yeah.
Anybody we run into being like, I'm sorry, he doesn't understand that humans have feelings.
He doesn't understand that anyone has feelings, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. It's
It's not
just
his thing.
a little bit in that, like, I wonder, if you tried to diagnose him with something with a modern diagnostic, he'd probably have like borderline personality disorder or something.
He definitely have something. I think, and that's the thing about characters to make them interesting. Sometimes they just end up being like, "Wow, you would all be diagnosed." Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, I know he has PTSD. I mean, that's baked
yeah.
in. So
Hmm.
between his trauma,
Hmm.
which he has plenty, it'd be really nice to just see him enjoy himself
Hmm.
like ever. That would be kind
Yeah.
of fun. So
Give him a day off. Yeah.
I know, be like,
Wouldn't
hey,
he
let's just
wouldn't know
go
what
to
to
the.
do with himself.
I know he really would not be like, there's nothing to accomplish. There's nothing to destroy. There's no one to yell at.
Or no one who wants to yell at him for.
I think we would enlist him in the Marines and see how that goes.
Oh boy,
That would be bad. That would
that would
definitely
be
be bad.
special.
The U.S. military and Villanelle are not ready for one another.
No. Shoot, I mean the Elvish military is not ready for much less.
No, definitely not. They're more like, I don't know, like the Coast Guard or the Air Force, like a little bit
Hmm.
kinder and gentler, and he just
Hmm.
is not having it. So
No. He's a Marine.
yes, definitely. Well, and that comes from, a lot of Vignolo is based on my dad
Hmm.
in some ways. I mean, I only have like a caricature of my dad in my mind because he was only around until I was 13,
Hmm.
and most of who he was another cat earthquake.
That
Um,
happens.
and most of who my dad was very different from my conscious memories because he was very ill. But the stories that I have of my dad and his dad are very much boiled into
Oh.
Vignon's makeup, and some of the stories of his past are kind of interpretations of my dad's own childhood, which was very um, kind of awful,
Hmm.
post depression,
Hmm.
not emotional depression, but actual, time
The
period
Great Depression.
depression,
Yeah.
Great Depression. Yes, when his family was a struggling family in West Philadelphia before it became, you know, Will Smith, West
Yeah.
Philadelphia. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of the marine sort of mentality sort of comes up in Vignon's persona
Mhm.
because of that.
Wow, that's really, I love how you can pull those things out and see how those things show up in stories and
Hmm.
how they connect and everything. It's just fantastic.
It's
And it
fun
has,
hearing as
yeah,
the
go ahead.
stories my dad would tell of his
Mhm.
uh, bedroll being set on fire in his Jeep on Paris Island by accident, and the repercussions of those kinds of things. One of these days, some Vignon's bedroll is going to have to get set on fire because
I
in
mean,
homage.
you just gotta, yes. Well, we could keep talking forever
We
because
could.
it's just so cool. And it's awesome. It's been great to finally have you on Author Elevate because we've talked about this for a while. It's great that we finally made it happen. And
Yes,
I
thank
mean,
you.
I'm gonna get to see you in person.
Yes,
It'll by the time this thing goes live, it'll be like after that.
that's all good.
but,
It's all
but
good.
we're both headed to the Realm Makers Winter Retreat. Becky, because she's like running it, and I am teaching there. About marketing. And now it's time for you to do some marketing and share a bit of shameless promotion. Brag about stuff. Where can our
Woo
listeners
woo.
find you online?
You can find me as an author at RebeccaPMinor.com, and you'll see which my 6 books that exist. My short stories are listed there. And you can join my mailing list, which would be amazing. Depending on when you join, you will get a story from me. If you join soon, you'll get one. If you join later, you'll get another.
Yay.
Would love to have folks do that. And of course, I'm on Facebook and the Instagrams. Not I'm actually on Facebook, but I occasionally respond to Instagram. I should do it the other way, but I
Mm.
haven't made the transition yet. So you can find me, and Rebecca P Minor is my handle on both of those. Or you can do my personal profile, which is Becky Minor also.
All right, so guys, make sure you look up all Becky is doing and hang out with her there and check out Realm Makers and just find her and follow her because she's doing great things. Thank you again so much, Becky, for making time for this.
Thanks for having me.